Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual evening with actor, writer, and producer Robinne Lee to discuss her debut novel, The Idea of You. A graduate of Yale University and Columbia Law School, Robinne was born and raised in Westchester County, New York. Robinne has numerous acting credits in both television and film, most notably opposite Will Smith in both Hitch and 7 Pounds, and as Ross Bailey in 50 Shades Darker and 50 Shades Freed. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband and 2 children. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by Meena Harris, one of the most powerful and dynamic young leaders in America. As the founder of the groundbreaking Phenomenal brand, she is a respected entrepreneur and is recognized as an influential voice for women's equality. Meena is also an attorney with extensive experience in consumer protection, data privacy, and cybersecurity. A #1 New York Times bestselling author, Meena released her latest book, Ambitious Girl, on January 19, 2021. She's a graduate of Stanford University and Harvard Law School and currently resides in San Francisco with her partner and 2 daughters. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by clicking the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of The Idea of You from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hi, Robin.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Meena.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Hi, Robin. Oh my God, I'm so glad to see your face live-ish. I wish it was in person, but
I know. It's so good to see you as well.
I know. Well, so I don't know if people even know this, but I'll quickly give a little bit of a background, which is that we met, I think in 2008 or 2007, probably, right? Through the Obama
campaign. Right, exactly.
Like it feels like 50 years ago. It basically was, if you count the pandemic in between that. And I just have to say, I mean, as you know, I'm a really new author, and your book, I believe, actually, we're both June authors. So mine came out June of last year and yours came out in June of 2017. And I remember so vividly you writing it and just like watching the whole process of
on Facebook.
Back then I didn't have any aspirations of being an author. I never thought I would be an author, but it was like looking back on that, it's just so wonderful to sort of remember watching your journey. And you and I actually share similar backgrounds in that we are recovering lawyers and went to law school, and now we're just doing other fun, creative stuff. So I don't know. I just want to start by kind of like, and so let me also give another introductory note, which is what is so interesting about this, and why I'm so excited to have this conversation, is that your book came out almost 5 years ago, but it's been like hot during this pandemic. And I have to read this quote from Vogue, which says, "It is the sleeper hit of the pandemic. There is no escapism like reading about a nearly middle-aged woman embarking on a glittering global love affair with a thoughtful young sex god. It is electric. It is an electric, triumphant read." And so, like, where do I even begin? Just tell me about the process of writing the book, and then just can you bring us to like where we are now and how it feels for 5 years later for people to be reading it like this again?
It's kind of crazy. I mean, I think when I wrote this book, and everything I've kind of written up until this book is kind of, you're writing for yourself. Like, I was writing what I wanted to read, and writing with the hopes that maybe someone will publish it, but you're not thinking about all that. And if you haven't published before, you don't know the weight of what goes into that or what the expectations are. And so you kind of just, it's like you may as well be writing in your diary, because it's just you and your laptop, and you don't have to worry about other eyes on it. And it was really freeing. I had a bunch of things happening at once. I was, turning 40 and finding that the roles that I was being offered or going up for in Hollywood were had been greatly reduced and when I was in my 20s. And they were often like things like, you know, you're playing the mom, or you're just playing the lawyer or the detective or something like that. But they weren't multi-layered. They weren't juicy roles that you really wanted to every once in a while something like that would come up. But for the most part, they kind of weren't. There was kind of like a shell, like now you're just the mom. And I found it really upsetting and disappointing. And I told the story that like I was, my husband, Eric, was away on a business trip. And I guess this is like March 2014, I guess. And I was home with the kids and I was up late one night surfing YouTube and came across a band and a guy in a band who was like absolutely stunning, but obviously, you know, like half my age. And I quickly went down this like rabbit hole of like researching him and whatever. And I found that he dated older women. So kind of like had planted a seed. And when my husband came back, like 2 days later, we were at a fundraiser. And I said to him like, oh, you know, I've just found this perfect guy. I'm going to run off and leave you and the two kids. But, you know, he's in a band and he's half my age. How do you feel about that? And he was like, you're crazy, but that would make a great book.
Yeah.
And as he said it, like it all fell into place. Like the idea of getting older and feeling like, you know, just at the point that women are coming into their power is when the world and media, whatever, is telling you that you're no longer viable, you're no longer desirable. And I was like, and I wanted to write about that, and like a woman kind of like reclaiming herself and like finding herself and redefining herself at 40. And I had so much fun with it. I mean, like parts of it were absolutely painful, but the most part, like overall, it was a wonderful experience. Like I had such a great time. And I don't think I will ever have that kind of freedom and joy writing again, because now I write with like my readers in mind, like my agent and my publisher, editors, like you're thinking about all these other things and like people, like ways that you might disappoint people or people may take it the wrong way. And with the idea of you, I was just kind of writing for me, and it just happened to click with a lot of women, and I feel really, really fortunate about that. And I kind of thought it would, but I still was writing for me, and there's a freedom with that I wish I could get that back. I don't know what your experience has been, but it was a joy that I feel like was really, I'm glad I had that experience, but it's kind of fleeting as well. Because then you kind of you know the beast. It's hard to like put it back in the box. I know I'm metaphors there, but there you go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where I would not be shocked if at another, you know, maybe inflection point in your life or some other experience that really moves you, that you have that, you know, you can pour yourself into something in the same way. You know, I think it is also just the beauty of writing books, and for women like you and me to have, you know, access to be able to do that and to tell our own stories and from our unique perspectives and experiences, right? And part of that is that they are our experiences and perspectives, and getting to actually share that and know that so many other women, you know, can connect with it. And if we aren't given that access and more women like us, then those stories don't get told, and those experiences are not shared. So I think that's a really, you know, beautiful piece of this, which it is literally your, you know, that unique perspective of yours. Well, so that is, I mean, just so inspiring, you know, also to me as an author. And I agree. I would say that I joke all the time that, and it's not a joke really, but that my kids' books, some of the lines in them, the real genesis of them were just as much for me, and were, you know, things that I talked about with adult audiences as they are for, you know, young readers. The big secret is I just took that stuff and I put it into a kid's book, right? But it really is sort of those fundamentals, and I think things that all of us can relate to. What I think is so just interesting and cool about your experiences is that now it, you know, the book has had this new surge of interest during the pandemic, and I believe it is currently in the top 50 of all books on Kindle, top 20 of all on Nook. And like, I mean, how does that feel? Is that something, I feel like you could have never imagined something like that happening, right? I mean, of course, none of us could have imagined this pandemic, but how has that been? And the ability to, you know, it's been 5 years, almost 5 years. So how have you
actually 4 years. It was
Is it, sorry, almost,
Wait.
yeah, I keep saying almost 5 years. It's maybe not fair to say because
So-
it's like 5 years.
It's not, it's, I want to say it's incredible, yes, but I feel like it's been mounting so slowly. Like my book has really grown through word of mouth. Like I feel like there were a few readers who came on early and they were just incredibly passionate and supportive and vocal, and they told their friends who told their friends who told their friends, and it's just grown that way. Like I have a couple of Facebook groups just for the book.
Yeah.
And to see it, like, I remember when it was like 30 women in the group, and now that's like 3,500 or whatever it is, and they come in droves. It used to be like 2 or 3 would straggle in every couple of days, and they all come in the same way. Like they're super like heartbroken, like they want more, they want a sequel, they want to talk about it. They don't have enough friends who've read it, and so they're looking for places to like get out all these feelings and discuss. And so we kind of joke it's like a virtual wine and chocolate kind of place, like it's this forum. And I really think that it's been word of mouth that's allowed this book to have the legs it has, and people keep discovering it and enjoying it and being moved by it in a way that they were not expecting to be. I think people thought, oh, it's going to be this, I don't know, superficial love story or whatever they thought it was going to be. It has all these different themes and layers, and I think women are surprised by how much it affects them and how much they relate to it and how much it says to them. And so I feel really lucky in that respect that so many women are like, this speaks to me.
Right. And the idea that sorry, no playing on the title there, but that as women get older, as we grow into sort of different phases, that it continue to speak to women and new generations of women in that way, which I think is super cool. But so let's talk about, the book itself. And we just talked briefly about my kids' books, and one of the big lines in the second one is, don't let anyone tell you who you are. You tell them who you are, right? Speaking of these being just as much for us as they are for readers. And that is really a central, I think, theme in your book, which is, how women are viewed and how we view ourselves.
Right.
And I want to talk about that, right? Why is it important that we don't let anyone tell us who we are, and that it's important that we create our own, identities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I've thought about a lot, just because of my story, and like my parents are both immigrants from Jamaica.
Yeah,
I was raised
another shared connection between
Jamaican. I was raised on the East Coast, and I think like they had a very specific idea of like what I should be as a Jamaican daughter. And I was also like tempted by all these American ideals. Like I could be an actress, I could be like a writer, and they were like, oh no, you're going to be a lawyer or maybe a doctor, like, or maybe business, but like those were your options. And like, I feel like I've spent my entire life like being like, no, I'm going to do something else, and I'm going to do it really well. And then I'll try something else and do that really well. But I don't want to be limited. Like I feel like I'm only here once, most likely, maybe, who knows? But just in case, I want to do it all. And I didn't like the idea of being, kind of pigeonholed. And I think so often, especially, I mean, I feel like it really hit after I had my babies, that it was kind of like you get to be known as like so-and-so's mom, and you'd go to preschool and or whatever it was, and like, oh, are you Dex's mom? And it's like, I have a whole life outside of being Dex's mom. And I wanted to be able to embrace all of that. I think it's important that women have that choice to not feel like, okay, well, this is all I am now. Like just being a mom is an incredibly wonderful thing, but you've got all these years prior to it that you're also feeding into your children, and they're being they are being enhanced and enriched by all the experiences you have and all you bring to the table, but also to not lose your identity of who you were prior to that. Like, like I do all these things for myself. Like I went back and started doing ballet 7 years ago because I stopped when I was, I don't know, a teenager, and I felt like that was something I always wanted to return to. And like once the kids were old enough and they were in school, like I returned to that, and just kind of like not feeling like you have to like live within the lines, and just wanting to do more and be more, and not having the world tell you, no, that's it. You're here for now. Just sit in this area and stay here. And I think life is so much more thrilling when you can kind of explore the other avenues. And I understand that's still also a luxury. Not every woman has that opportunity. But if I have it, I want to use it, you know, and I want to get it out there and let women know that they can be other things. Or if they feel like they're really struggling, to realize that I see them, you know, and we know that there's more there than maybe what you're putting out into the world right now, and to not feel those parts.
Yeah, I relate to that so much. I think including the sort of immigrant, I think influences, right, of expectations of what success looks like. And, you know, it's funny again that we're kind of here. I've watched your path, and, you know, now I'm an author too. And I saw you, you know, what I think is really interesting about you too is that you did sort of go on that traditional path, as did I, right? We went to law school, we did that. And then at a certain point,
make my parents happy. And then.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I should be clear that I feel lucky that I actually was not pressured, but there, you know, that's the model that I had. Right. And I think it was also, you know, there was an expectation of, so I'm getting really harsh light coming in unexpectedly. Can you see me okay?
I can see you fine.
Okay. But, you know, there was an expectation of excellence and achievement. But the model that I had was, you know, my grandmother was sort of a more, you know, scientist, right? Medicine. And then my mom and aunt kind of broke away from that a little bit. But they're still lawyers. And that's what I had. And I'm only now coming into, like being creative and being an entrepreneur and being an author is actually really who I am and what I want to do. And as you said, having those options, right? And yes, it's a, you know, privilege to sort of do what you want. But I think it's so interesting that you were able to, you know, break into Hollywood and are, you know, were acting, but then that once again was a moment where you were being in some ways constrained, right? By what you were telling you with the sort of standard mold that they saw you as.
Exactly.
So who, you know, I mean, you've spoken about this a little bit already, but, you know, when you think about your reader, right? And the importance of giving that story, who is it? And I think it's probably a lot of different types of women, but who do you imagine or who do you know to be your audience based on sort of, you know, the engagement with Facebook groups and others that this seems to really speak to? Is it women who are in that age group? Is it, or can you even pinpoint sort of who you view as the main reader?
You can't. Like, I really thought this book was going to maybe strike a chord with like women 35 to 45.
Yeah.
Women in that group are like from 20 to 75. And I'm not even exaggerating. Like, I'm so surprised when older women come in and they're like, I thank you. Thank you for seeing us. Like, thank you for representing us and realizing that we still like have heartbeats and passions and desires. And we don't just die and shrivel up at 30 or whatever. And some of them are married with kids and some of them aren't. And some of them, you know, some of them are older and have never been married. Some have been married and are divorced. It's a full spectrum, and it's all races and it's all across the world. And I love that. I love that I've tapped into something that can be so varied and widespread. And it's not something, it's not just, you know, white woman or black woman. 72, whatever it is. It's like, it's kind of like it's all over. And I like that because I also feel like it gives us this universal theme and something to bond over, something that brings us all together. Like, I really like how varied my group is and how all those women have found something that in common that they love.
And especially, so, I mean, go ahead.
We're so divisive and like, it's nice to see common ground.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's this point that no matter where you are, there is that, you know, maybe unfortunate sort of shared experience and connection among women of being, you know, treated as invisible or devalued or again put into a box, right? That's exactly, again, why I wrote my second book, which is about, you know, we tell women you can be ambitious, but not too ambitious. You can be successful, but not too successful. Or, you know, in your case, as we talked about in Hollywood, it's, you know, you can be successful in a certain way if you look a certain way, if you, right. And the fact is, that's either one, a very unhappy life, or it's just not reality, right? We are multidimensional. We are more than our careers or our very various, roles as parent or caretaker, all the other, things that we do.
Absolutely.
So I love that, there's that universality to it, and it's clearly, but obviously through the drama and the way that you so brilliantly allowed people to get, kind of sucked into the story of it, which is also, the key. So, I mean, 4 years later, this was your debut novel. And I know we have audience questions that I've taken a peek at, that some of them are asking, more about what's coming or other ambitions you might have. So I'll wait to get to those. But how are you, no pressure, but how are you feeling about, as an author? And you spoke about this being such a special, but, really big, piece of work, right? And I agree that when you do it once, it's like, oh my God, how could I ever do that again? Right. So yeah, how are you feeling? Are you wanting to do?
It's really daunting. It's been very anxiety. I feel like I've had crazy anxiety from the time like a month out before this book was released through today. Like it just,
yeah.
And it was a fear of how people were going to perceive the book and how they were going to accept, whether or not they were going to accept it, what they were going to read into it, how they were going to think of me or judge me, how I was going to be seen. Was it going to change my life? Like the way I moved up in the world, like knowing that, I don't know, like parents at my kids' school might have read it or whatever it is, or like their teachers or, or just, you don't know. And I feel like all those things kind of, they freaked me out a little bit. And I've kind of gotten over that the fear of judgment bit. Now it's the self-doubt of like, can I do this again?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had a good 3 to 4 years after I'd finished. So I actually finished the book, writing the book in the rewrites, et cetera, in early 2016. And I want to say I had a good 3.5 years of complete writer's block. Like I shut down. I couldn't write. Like I had ideas about things and I would try to write, and then they were awful. Like it was, I just couldn't make sentences flow. I couldn't write a paragraph. Like everything just felt like convoluted and not just, it wasn't me, and it didn't flow like me. It didn't sound like me. And I felt like oh my God, I've lost my voice. I can't get that back. And I've been trying to, I went on this, I read a bunch of, books on writer's block, et cetera. And so I was trying to like just write through it, like not judging myself, like writing an end in a journal, or writing, like starting documents and being like at the top, like this one doesn't matter. Like you're just writing it, knowing that I'm never going to share this. Cause it was really the idea that, what's my agent going to think? What are my readers going to think? What's my editors going to think? That was making me freeze. Like I couldn't.
Right.
And even like my writers group, I'm in this writers group. It's a Yale Woman of Los Angeles writers group. And they're incredibly supportive and encouraging, but they're all really, really, really good. And so they're like the first people who see anything I write. And I want it to be perfect for them even. Like I don't want to, like, and it's a kind of place where you can fail, like you can put it there and be like, this isn't so great. You can work on this, and this, but I'm so terrified of that. Like even figuring out what I'm going to submit next is like, I'm like paralyzed.
Sorry, I didn't mean to pressure you. I love hearing.
No, it's okay.
Relate to this, right? Like the pressure you put on yourself. And
so I'm writing something now. I'm writing something new now. I'm enough into it that I feel like, okay, I guess I am writing, like I'm 100 pages in. I'm like, I guess this is the next book. It is not a sequel to The Idea of You, at least. And I don't want to, it's another woman's story. It's about relationships and friendship, and I don't want to give away too much.
Okay, that's really awesome. Congratulations that you're sort
Thank
of,
you.
you're on 100 pages. That is very impressive. I mean, the point is this stuff, yeah, it's hard. It takes work. And especially when it's creative work, it's just, it's scary to like share that with people and to put out into the world. And now you have the pressure of like doing one that was successful and you want to write. I mean, it's a whole thing. I've heard, I don't know how many authors or aspiring authors or folks that might be interested in that part of the conversation, but are there other things that helped you sort of, along the way and getting back in sort of the rhythm? I've heard, for example, this is more, I guess, in kind of like the screenwriting space and in entertainment, but just like reading a ton, right? Just like finding other outlets to just engage with creative content, even if you're not actually writing every day yourself.
I read regularly.
Mm-hmm.
I could not read for all of 2020. I did not start and finish a book.
Yeah, it's a whole nother thing, right? It's hard to just concentrate.
Right. I started several that were all nonfiction. I did not read one, and I didn't finish them. I didn't even start any fiction in 2020. So this year was like, okay, this is the year I get back to reading. I've already read, I'm almost done with I've read 2 novels. So I feel like I'm getting back into it. For me, it can be anything that inspires me. It can be art. It can be travel. It can be music. Sometimes I hear a song and it gets in my head and I stop what I'm doing and I rush to my computer and I just go and like write 2 or 3 scenes because it feels like it'll evoke something that's so strong and so specific and so like demanding that I get it on paper that I have to stop what I'm doing and do it. But that might not be what I'm currently writing. So it might just be like 3 scenes and something that I'm gonna have to come back to someday and figure out what's the rest of this book. But
right, yeah,
like acorn of like thought that had to be flushed out to a degree.
Let me pause on that though, because I think that's really great advice, and it's the same for me. Where just part of it, I think, is at least for me that I've learned in my creative process is just creating spaciousness or like experiences, or that those things will come about, right? I think especially for those of us that are busy and you're overscheduled and you're right, like that actually I have found it really inhibits my creativity, and I have to create like white space for me to even have those thoughts come in, right? And I've had some of my best ideas, most creative ideas, breakthroughs in those sort of open moments.
Right.
To your point, even like just going to the grocery store instead of getting the groceries delivered, right? Just like living life and having the chance to like observe but that, being self-aware enough that if something pops into your head, like go jot it down wherever you can. And
exactly.
If it doesn't relate to what you're like currently focused on or trying to produce, that's okay. Like, but just get it out. And sometimes that process then there's like an iterative, right? Where it may end up, inspiring something on the thing you're currently working on.
Right. So I'm an avid runner and I don't run as much anymore. I walk now mostly. Is where I've done my best writing. Like I've always said, like, well, even when I was writing the idea of you, if I got to a part, there's like, I don't know what's going on. I'm not so sure. Let me take some time off. I'd go for a walk and it would just like all come clear and like the dialogue would come to me, everything. And I'd repeat it several times while I was walking so I wouldn't forget it because I don't walk.
Yeah.
I'd come home and then I'd like write it. So that is still this really inspiring for me. And I find that I have to change it up. Like I was doing the same walk over and over again and it wasn't doing it. Even changing direction of the walk. Something you would.
I love that.
You're seeing the world or the streets, whatever, the houses at a different perspective, and that's enough for my brain to work in a different way.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was gonna say, so I've part of it is again just like pandemic life and trying to like make it all work. But my Peloton has been really important for me. It doesn't really address your thing. Well, I guess, I mean, if you do like different classes, I was gonna say I'm like in the same place, looking out the same window. So that part of like mixing it up is not, and by the way, I have to remind myself that it is good to sometimes leave the house and get some fresh air and take a walk. So good reminder there. But it is like, for me, same thing. It's like, those are when I think it's just like clarity of thought and just like spaciousness. And there are so many times I like literally have a note on my phone called like Peloton notes. Cause it's like, it all comes while I'm on the bike and I have to just get it all on paper. Yep. Right. So that's such a great tip. And I think it's one where, and I listened to a podcast recently with M. Night Shyamalan, the filmmaker, And he said that it's sort of similar, like creating that space. And he sets aside, I think it's like 2 hours. It's either 2 hours a day or 2 hours a week, where that's just sort of like creative time. And sometimes he writes things, sometimes he does nothing, right? But like it is that giving that sort of dedicated white space, and that really spoke to me of just, knowing that is, by the way, not only good for like our mental health and just like taking a break from things, but if you're a creative or you're trying to, give yourself that space, it's actually really helpful. I know we have questions and I want to get to them. I'll just ask a last question, sort of more specifically about the book. And I think it's something that we are, as a society, even confronting even more intensely now, which is, you explore the darker side of celebrity, right? And I'm curious, so much. I think about, when we met in 2008, it was like very early days of Facebook, and we were using Facebook to organize for the campaign, right? But things are so different now, right? Both in terms of celebrity and in terms of politics and how and new tools. So how are you thinking and feeling about, social now, fandom and like fandom culture and like necessity versus toxicity versus obsession and, all this stuff?
It's tricky because I feel like I have to use it more. I'm using it more now to promote and market my stuff.
Right.
Than I was, let's say, in 2008, like, because I wasn't using that much for acting. It would be like if I had a show or a film coming out, then you can like flood it and several things leading up to that premiere date, but it's not like continuous. Like the book is like continuous, and I don't think anyone tells you that you're going to be selling your book like every day. Like I spend good 2 hours a day just promoting the book, like whether it's engaging with people who've read it or whatever, or talking in book clubs or whatever. And it's
a lot of work. I think that is
a lot of work,
guys. It's a lot of like promoting and selling a book after writing it and all this stuff. It's like very hard. Yeah.
The next book, like I had no idea it was going to take. But it's interesting. Like I feel I probably am not the best person to speak to because I don't feel like I have as much balance. I wish I spent less time on social media. I find that I'm spending less time now because after post-election, I'm much more calm. So I'm spending less time on Twitter or like, doom scrolling. I'm not doing that anymore. Like I'll go into Twitter and I'll just see like generally what's going on and then step out. I feel like it's going to work. I'm not afraid that we're all going to die. I'm not like, even with the vaccine, like everything is just like, okay, it's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. So I'm spending less time on Twitter and Instagram. I've always been fairly good about like posting my picture and then getting out. And then every once in a while going and seeing friends and what they're doing. But during the pandemic, I became like, it was my way to not disassociate, but to like, to completely like get out of the anxiety. I would just search things like jewelry, things like that. And so I look at all those feeds and it's like, it takes me like, especially like the last thing I do before I go to bed, I watch like puppy videos and something just so I'm like, I'm not anxious and I'm just totally relaxed. And so Instagram is like, for me, it's good because I don't focus so much on like what I don't have and like how other people are living, especially this year, no one was traveling. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm here, you're not. It's like, I didn't feel that kind of like pressure of like wanting like to keep up with the Joneses. I just wanted something that would like
an outlet. Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like, I try to illustrate in the idea of you about how these fandoms can be wonderful and incredible and supportive and loving and creative outlets, but if they have something they're not happy with, it can be toxic, and vitriol can be really damaging. And I don't think people realize how many people read all their notifications or whatever it is, or if you're an actress and you're a huge star and you Google your name or whatever, or you're looking it up on Twitter, like, and you see all the hate that's out there, it can be really demoralizing. Not just demoralizing, it's painful. And I really wanted people to kind of be aware of that. Like when you're writing and you think you're at home writing anonymously in your basement or your bedroom or whatever, and you're just, you press send. It's like, it can reach someone else in a way that's very personal and intrusive and can feel very damaging and like an assault of in a way. And I don't think people realize that, or enough people think before they press send.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with this pandemic too, I've been talking about Twitter, like it's already I think can be a very toxic place, but I found myself trying to also step outside of receiving it as a personal attack or a personal, critique, to your point about somebody just anonymously doing this from wherever. And part of it was also just seeing, I mean, people are mad, people are, frustrated, people are angry. Everybody's going through stuff right now. And you can see it coming out. I'm like, oof, you had a bad day. And like, by the way, so did I, like, so I think it's this moment especially has been, and obviously with the election, we now have so much of just not even knowing if there are real people behind.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's just a whole new world. And I think the challenge, and interestingly, I think especially on the topic of politics, I've gotten a question over and over and over again at different events and panels. And it started around the 2016 election, but it's continued, interestingly, where people ask, like, how do you deal with online, harassment or criticism? And it shows that people are worried about that, or people are, hesitant to speak out because they are fearful of backlash, which, by the way, I think we have to be clear that is different than this whole thing about cancel culture, which I'm not, I'm like, it's 8:00. I guess people on the East Coast, it's almost 8:00 on a Saturday. So I don't know if we want to get into a whole debate around cancel culture. It's a whole other thing. But I think it's often a distraction, right, from things like accountability and learning, which is something we all also have to do. So it's sort of seeing both sides of that. But there's no question, right, that and as you said, I mean, they're like, you're real people, right? Like people are affected by this stuff. And I think ultimately it's, especially if you choose to, be a public figure, do that work and put yourself out there, right? Like it doesn't come without those things, but it also, the way in which it shows up is not always or often is just not okay and affects people in really deep ways. So, well, I didn't mean to end on that sort of somewhat depressing note, but I think it also just goes to show the, relevance of what you're engaging with and how that is evolving and how lots of us can really relate in different ways to, this beautiful work that you've created and is now, again, something that's providing that, space for so many of us here, 4 years later. And so congratulations. I just think that is such a beautiful journey as an author. And I'm excited to see what more you do without pressure. Take your time. If it takes another 5 or 10 years, just do you. So, but I just want to commend you for that. And thank you for producing something that has been so key for so many of us to get through this pandemic. So I want to move to questions. We have a lot of questions. I know we're not going to be able to get to every single one, but luckily, this is cool. This has like upvotes. So I'll go with ones that people want to hear you asked. Have you ever thought about writing the idea of you from Hayes' POV, from point of view? Would you ever consider doing this, or do you think it would be too repetitive or even more emotional than writing from Soul's perspective?
I've been asked this quite a few times. I never considered doing it for multiple reasons. One is because I felt like it was becoming a trend. I saw a lot of writers doing that, like romance writers would write a book, whatever, and then would write it from the other character's point of view. And I thought, well, it's been done now a few times. I don't want to just jump on the bandwagon. Two is because he's British and I can write for a British character as if I'm interacting with a British character. But I don't know that I could do a British person's train of thought, stream of conscious.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, because like all the little idioms and the way they speak and the way they think and like different words and term, whatever. I feel like that's so specific, and I'm well aware when people don't get it right. Like I'm like, you're not.
Yeah.
And I would have to go and live in England for like a year, which I would enjoy very much. But I right now I can't do that. I've got kids in school, etc. So I think like those are the two reasons why I've kind of held off from doing that. And I also don't want to. I wouldn't want to go back and just replay the same just from someone else's.
I appreciate that point though, not to like be too deep about this, but I think it's like a very almost responsible of you. I think there's a lot of really important conversations happening in the publishing industry, whether it's fiction or frankly nonfiction, about like who should tell what stories. And I think it's very sort of self-aware for you to say, I'm not British and I'd have to like really, really make it up. And I think that's just generally an important point for a lot of folks to, think about in terms of, especially in an industry where we know, so many people don't have access to tell their own stories from their personal experiences, and what that is how I personally think stories should be told, whether fiction or nonfiction. So the next question is, as someone who listened actually, this is kind of interesting and related, but as someone who listened to the Audible version of The Idea of You, I appreciated the way you managed the accents and voices. How did preparing to narrate this manuscript compare to preparing for a TV or film role?
Very different in that these characters like came from me, and while I write kind of out loud, like I'm constantly rereading what I've written, and I read it out loud so I can hear the rhythm, I can hear the syntax. Literature to me is like there's like a meter to it, like great writing has like a rhythm to it, and so I'm reading it out loud to hear the rhythm, and in so doing I'm also doing all my characters out loud, and so I hear them when I'm writing them and when I'm creating them. And so I knew what those accents were before I even did the audiobook, because I had to hear them in my head out loud several times during the process to know them. I think before the actual recording, I went over like the night before each day we were recording, I would go and read like 3 chapters, whatever, just to make sure that I still had them. And if I had to differentiate between like guys in the band or whatever, I would know exactly, specifically like how each one spoke. So they're all accents that were already kind of in my repertoire. So it wasn't like working on anything new, except for, I mean, the Ethiopian one, but I'd worked on that when I was writing the book. Like I want to get the flow of how Lalit speaks. I was watching videos of like Ethiopian women in America, but like whatever, like just like kind of that kind of rhythm and like the lilts. I feel like I did that research all before I did the audiobook.
That is so interesting. And especially obviously with your background as an actor, I'm going to ask my own question, which is, have you thought about like a movie? So I'm sure you get asked that question all the time. I'm shocked that it's not off the top of the list here.
The book was optioned to be a movie a while back, and I can't really talk about it.
Okay.
It's in development. That's
okay, cool.
That's all I can say.
Awesome. So the next question is, as a 40-something mom myself, I feel that this story ended the way it had to, heartbreaking as it may have been. Was there ever a moment where you thought that perhaps maybe Sol and Hayes's future might have turned out differently?
No, I knew the ending of this book from the beginning. I knew that it was going to be this incredibly intense relationship. It was going to start as an intense affair and then become something much more genuine and profound, but that it was going to have to end, and she was going to be the one to end it. And so there was never any, oh, maybe I should let them be together or whatever. There was never any until people were like, can I have a sequel? But when I was writing this, I definitely knew like where it was going. And and a lot of it was to show that as women, we're constantly putting others' happiness before our own. Like she's putting her daughter's well-being and her daughter's happiness and her daughter's mental health, which is probably a good thing, before her own happiness. She's putting, like she's kind of foreseeing where Hayes will be in 5 or 10 years and not wanting him to sacrifice these years. Like she's taking all that into consideration. She's thinking about business and her business partner and how this relationship has been affecting them and what it's done to this business that they've spent, you know, I don't know, 5, 7 years building, 10 years building, and seeing it kind of struggle because of her relationship to him. And so it was kind of like, look, I've got to balance all these different things. I'm going to be the one that's going to have to suffer and end it.
Sorry, keep going.
And I feel like that's awful, but it's kind of what we do as women often, whether or not we realize we're doing it. Our husbands first, we're putting our bosses first, we're putting our coworkers first, we're putting our kids first. It's so rare that we put ourselves first. It's different maybe if you're single and young, or single and just single, but once you've got other people kind of relying on you, you know, everyone else comes first, sadly. I mean, I think about this pandemic, and I love my husband and my kids, and we've survived it intact. And I love his company, but I've made so many dinners on nights that I did not want to make dinner. And once have I said, like, I'm not making dinner well, sometimes I'll be like, okay, well, let's order or whatever. I'll plan ahead, but it's never been like, you know what? I'm on strike. You guys figure it out. I'm walking off the job. I haven't done it once. And it's like, it hasn't been my husband's responsibility to be like every night. Like I wake up every morning thinking, what am I going to do for dinner? Infatuation with Padma Lakshmi started because during the pandemic, I would go on Instagram first thing in the morning and see what she was cooking, and then be like, okay, because she's so good about, like, if you've got this, great, and if you have this in your kitchen, if you have your pantry, but if you don't have it, don't worry, you can substitute this.
Yeah,
like, this is what we're doing for dinner. Like,
I love it.
But I'm thinking about that first thing in the morning. He's not thinking about that.
Right.
4 o'clock, maybe 5 o'clock, he'd be like, what are we doing for dinner? And it's like, oh, gee, like, well, I've already planned everything. And it's like, that's the kind of stuff that we take on, all these responsibilities and all these obligations that, like, it's not that we didn't sign up for them, but it's kind of the default kind of becomes us. You know?
Yeah. No, it's the reality. I mean, again, that can be a whole other conversation about just gender roles in our homes and how this pandemic has really, I think laid bare for a lot of folks that, some of those inequities exist in our own homes, as we know they do exist in society. So I know we're not going to get to all the questions, but there are lots of questions addressing the audiobook and praising you for how well done that was. And I just want you to see that. And some folks are interested in sort of the process. Others are clearly really want to talk about the book and the book itself. So I will go to another question that asks about, the connection to Harry Styles. And since he was, referenced as one of the main inspirations for Hayes. And does it ever bother you that the book has become so closely tied to Harry Styles? Do you worry that it's being incorrectly advertised as like Harry fanfic? How do you feel about all of that?
I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before.
Oh, wow. Yes. Good question.
This was never supposed to be Harry Styles fanfic. It was never supposed to be a Harry Styles book. I wanted to create this character who I thought would be like my perfect guy if he was a British boy bander. So I want him to be posh, and I want him to be kind of like Prince Harry.
Well, I was going to say, now you have a whole nother,
like the Harry, Meghan, Happy Ever After book.
Right.
But I wanted him to be, but I definitely saw the appeal of Harry Styles. I think Harry has a charm and charisma that, and I don't, that he's kind of a unicorn, right? He's like, he's incredibly successful, yet he seems so humble and genuine in his interactions with people, and he's ridiculously beautiful, and he's sexy, but he's sensitive. Like, he's just like this perfect guy. And I want him to be this perfect guy, but I also wanted him to have this kind of British upper class background and schooling and education, and being like well traveled as a child, and coming from a family that was much more traditional and kind of frowned on what he did for a living, because, you know, he was supposed to go on and be a barrister or whatever, like his father. And so that he had that kind of struggle there, that he wasn't supposed to, that's not, he wasn't following. It would be like if Prince Harry decided to release an album. You can imagine. We did not have this planned for you. What are you doing? I kind of want it to feel a little more like that. And yes, there's a lot of Harry Styles in there, but there's also, like, you know, there's a lot of other people I'd researched. There's a lot of, like, a few ex-boyfriends. There's my husband. There's, like, I kind of like took the best of every guy I'd ever dated or wanted to date, and put into this one guy. And so when people are like, "Oh, it's Harry," I'm like, only because you don't know all the things that this guy once said to me, or this guy once did, or this guy, like, and when I'm reading him or writing for him, I'm not picturing Harry. Like, Hayes is so specific in my head, like who he is.
Yeah.
Not Harry. And so, but I feel like Harry is the closest to Hayes in the public eye with a similar career. Like, there's a lot of, like, Eddie Redmayne I put in there, and Benedict Cumberbatch, but, like, no one's going to them because I didn't describe an actor. You know what I mean? Like, they're kind of like, oh, let's go straight to the guy in the boy band.
Right.
So
it also again, that people can, like, we're now talking about, you know, Harry and Meghan, and that there's lots of different people that, you know, you can kind of tie that to or imagine it in this current moment, right? Right. Especially with the sort of commentary around, or the dynamic with stardom and fandom, right? And again, that's intensifying, and our ability to, like, even access that and to interact with it has changed incredibly since you first wrote this, which I think is very interesting, right? Thanks to social media and the ability to write directly, you know, connect with artists in a way that was not the case back then.
Right.
So as I said, a lot of folks there are questions also just generally around, you know, your experience as an actor, both in doing the voices for the audiobook, but also screenwriting and doing dialogue. Is that something that you feel may have come easier to you, or that you?
I definitely think acting made the dialogue much easier, because I know what sounds good and what doesn't sound good. Like, from numerous jobs and auditions or whatever, I'm constantly reading dialogue and saying it out loud and trying to make it find the rhythm. I know when something's well done and when it's not. And so when I'm writing, I'm not, like, standing up and acting out my scenes, but I'm going back and forth and I'm saying it out loud. So you can hear my cockatiel. We have a cockatiel. She's in the next room, but sometimes she's loud. So I'm definitely the acting background helped with the writing of dialogue and just, like, kind of hearing the conversation.
You mentioned that it was painful for you too, writing the book, and someone asked, do you write to preserve or relive memories, calm the mind, confess your truth, or escape the mundane? Maybe all of the above. What is your
what were the questions? It's all of the above at different times for different projects, I guess. Yeah. Like, what I'm writing now does not feel like escapism at all. I kind of feel like and it's not calming the mind. It's like exploring my own truth. I think it's kind of wanting to get out my story to a degree, like what it is to walk around and feel other. Like that's kind of what I'm working on right now. And so a lot of that is just kind of like exploration. It's probably like something that I could have done in therapy, but didn't. And so it depends. I think I'm exploring different things at different times, and it depends on where I am in my life and what's going on and what's weighing on me. When I was writing the idea of you, it was more that my kids were younger. I was feeling very much like, exhausted as a mom, but then kind of frustrated that I was just a mom and wanting to kind of rediscover the other parts of me. And I don't feel that when I'm writing now, I don't feel that. I'm not in that frame of mind. I'm older, and I'm kind of confident with all the different, with my identity, but I do feel like it's still not in flux. It's just complicated. It's complex, and I kind of want to share that. Like, I feel like so much of your identity comes out of a sum of your experiences, and like how the world, it's like how you think of yourself, what you are, how you think of yourself, and then how the world views you and responds to you. And so that's kind of what I'm writing about. And that's more, for me, that's kind of an exploration. It's not escapism at all. It's kind of just like really looking inward and kind of self-analysis, I guess, to a degree.
So I know you said that, I believe you said you knew the ending at the beginning, right? When you first wrote it. And one question that's gotten a lot of interest is, was the ending always planned this way? It sounds like yes, but was there any resistance by anyone because you weren't doing the traditional happily ever after or happy for now endings?
Not really. My agent asked me to make it a little less harsh, I guess. He said to some degree, can you make it, we just want to know that Hayes is going to be okay. And I'd heard that from my writer's script. Can you make sure we want to know that Hayes is going to be okay. So I threw in another scene, a scene right before the last scene, I guess, when Selene is crying in her bed and Isabel comes into her room and finds her crying and is asking her about it. And she says, is like, do you think Hayes is upset? And Selene's telling her, oh, Hayes is going to be okay, which is really my way of telling the audience, right. He's going to be fine because I said so. Right. So that was my way of like dealing with that issue. But I was really, so I'm a huge Francophile. I chose to make this character French. I love French books, French movies, everything about the French culture. And I love that French films don't feel like they have a bow. And I really felt strongly that this French woman would have a French ending to her story. And I remember even telling that to my agent, like, this is not an American story. It is not a happily ever after. If it ever gets made into a movie, I'd like it to not be a happily ever after. It's a French story.
Yeah. I remember that about you, that you're a big Francophile, which is interesting because in contrast to the question about writing it from the perspective of a Brit, I think you feel, right, like I think you go every year, or you had been going every year, and you sort of interacted with and studied that in some ways. That's interesting. So on the one hand, you were saying that it's sort of like you could write about interacting with a Brit, but on the other, you think of it as a French story, not as like an American one that is that can be categorized.
I spent enough time there. I lived there. I know well. I could inhabit a French woman's.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But not necessarily a British man. That's even a man. In addition to like, So it's really important to me to kind of to keep to that and to be honest, and like I knew what this story was going to be, and it was supposed to feel like a French film to me.
Yeah. Well, I know we're, I think we're actually over time, but I want to ask you a final question that is one that's very important to me in the work that I do and with children's books, and I'm curious about it myself, which is that there's an annual diversity report created by the Ripped Bodice. It's still a bit disappointing. This question says that in 2020, for every 100 books published by the leading romance publishers, 12 were written by people of color. Which came out to 8.1% of authors of color versus 91.9 written by white authors. What are your instead of asking you what are your thoughts on this? I mean, I think I know your thoughts. But
what's so funny is that I feel like I follow so many writers of color, like whether they're Black or Latinx or Asian American. Like I don't even notice that skew because I follow so many of them and I'm aware of all their successes and accolades and so when I hear that I'm like, how's that possible that that number's so small? Because I feel like I follow so many on Twitter and I know that they're doing things. And
yeah, it's interesting. I feel the same way, but on the other hand, I'm also very aware, and it's like, oh, we all know each other, or that's
maybe it is really small,
right? It's only whatever percentage of I think they quoted 8%, which
so,
I mean, I think
depressing.
It is, but it also speaks to, I think, again, what we kind of started off with talking about a little bit as well, which is, who's given access to publish, whose stories get told, whose stories are deemed
they're valued too. Because I feel like as women or as people of color, your stories are not necessarily valued as much as the white man's story. And that I mean, the fact that we have a category called women's fiction and there's no men's fiction.
Exactly.
That's problematic.
Well, I was gonna
writers make less money, even though that they're a much larger piece of the pie of actual all book sales. Mm-hmm. That's problematic.
Yep. And the point too that inequity exists at every stage, at every level, in every layer of this, right? Including, who is making decisions in the publishing industry, who is making decisions on, what books are considered bestsellers, or who gets that validation and credibility that we know leads to people getting to write more books. There's a whole sort of movement or a moment around this that was on Twitter around authors revealing how much they got for their advances, and the inequities there, I mean, is stunning, right? So even if you do get access, if you're not,
I remember,
it's wild, right? And it just, the more that is perpetuated, the deeper, right, those inequities grow. So it also speaks to, I think, again, the importance of someone like you, right, having the ability to do this, and in doing so and continuing that necessarily opens up the door for others, right, to show that it's possible to write, for a Black woman to write a very successful romance novel. And we have to show that, unfortunately, right, that you have to prove that you can be successful for other people to get the same opportunities. So I appreciate that question. It's a really important one. And it's one that I think we all can be often reminded of in terms of, we've made progress, but there's still a lot more work to do in terms of diversifying the publishing industry and whose stories get told.
Yep.
So, well, thank you so much. It's just been so special for me personally to get to do this now as a baby author, and to get to talk to you, an expert seasoned author. Oh, there you go. Those are my kids' books. Thank you. And it's been, as I said, so incredible to watch your journey. And I know I speak for everyone who's asked a question that we can't wait to see the next thing, and are so just excited about what all may come. So thank you.
And I actually have to report better news on the publishing front. We just did our Winter Institute, which is the big, where all the booksellers and the publishers come together. We did it virtually this year, but there are many more people of color getting hired for positions as editors in publishing. So I think we're going to see that change. Mm-hmm. And I'm very, very excited about that. So I just want to thank you, all our viewers from everywhere. that you're watching. If you don't already have this book, you just need to press the green button and we're going to ship it right out to you. If you're in Miami, you can come by and pick it up at any one of our stores. I hope that we will get to see you both in person, maybe at Miami Book Fair in November, maybe in November. I thank you for your work. Please know that your books, are in our stores and that we love them and that we're so grateful that you have been here with us in our little virtual bookstore.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for
good
doing
night.
that. And yeah, thank you for that note, which is thank you everybody for supporting local bookstores. Indie bookstores need our support. And I'm so grateful for all that you do to support authors like us. You truly are just such important institutions in our communities. And I know that this has been a particularly hard time for small businesses and for bookstores. So thank you for that. And thank you for everybody for showing up and supporting, and buy Robin's book, support books and books, and buy more books and books and books.
Wonderful. Good night. Stay well.
Thank you so much.
Bye.